I won't forget the life I promised myself. That was the unspoken mantra of Steve Jobs. Not the Apple keynote speeches, not the glossy advertisements, but the private, inner vow he made to himself, to live a life true to his vision, not someone else's. Jobs was fired from the very company he built. He was called arrogant, difficult, even replaceable. In those moments, he had every reason to give up. But instead, he chose to remember the promise. He chose to turn rejection into energy, doubt into design, failure into focus. The promises you make to yourself may be the only ones that matter. Think about that for a moment. Every single day, we're making promises to our families, to our friends, to our bosses, to our colleagues. We say we'll meet deadlines. We say we'll show up. We say we'll be there when they need us. And for the most part, we do. But there's one kind of promise that almost everyone breaks, the promise we make to ourselves. That's the most dangerous lie you can ever tell, not to the world, but to yourself. Because when you break a promise to yourself, you're not just letting go of a goal. You're weakening your very identity. You're teaching yourself that your own word doesn't matter. Steve Jobs understood this at a level most people never reach. He wasn't playing the game of pleasing others. He was playing the game of staying true to the vision he promised himself. It wasn't about keeping Wall Street happy. It wasn't about gaining applause at a conference. It wasn't even about building products for the sake of profit. He was honoring a vow that he made to himself long before Apple was $1 trillion brand. And what was that vow? That he would not live a borrowed life. He would not build what others told him to build. He would not shrink himself to fit into the world. Instead, he would stretch the world until it bent around his vision. That was the promise. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't keep that kind of promise. Most people give it up the second life gets messy. The second the world says, you can't do that. The second they feel the sting of rejection or failure. And so the life they dreamed of, the one they envisioned in quiet moments, fades away. Jobs was different. When Apple fired him from the very company he built, most people would have walked away, embarrassed, humiliated, and finished. But Jobs didn't abandon the promise he made to himself. He didn't trade it for safety or acceptance. Instead, he went deeper into the vision. He built NXT. He nurtured Pixar. He sharpened his skills, even when no one was watching, because he had promised himself something greater than just success. He promised himself that he would live a life true to his imagination, not to someone else's approval. And that's the power of self-promise. It becomes your compass when the world collapses around you. It becomes your shield when critics throw their stones. It becomes your source of fuel when failure burns everything else to the ground. Ask yourself right now, what is the promise you've made to yourself? Not the one you tell your friends, not the one you share on social media, not the one that sounds good in conversation. The real one. The one that lives inside of you. The one you think about late at night when no one else is around. Maybe you promised yourself you would write that book. Maybe you promised yourself you would build that business. Maybe you promised yourself you would never settle for mediocrity, even if it meant struggling longer than everyone else. That promise is the most sacred thing you own. But here's the test: when everything goes wrong, when people laugh, when money runs dry, when your energy is gone, will you still keep that promise? Or will you abandon it like so many others? Jobs kept his. That's why when he came back to Apple, he didn't return as a man desperate to fit in. He returned as a man who never broke his vow. And that's why the products he built weren't just tools. They were symbols of a man who had stayed true to his vision. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone. These weren't just devices. They were evidence that keeping a promise to yourself can change the world. You see, the power of a self-promise is not in what it gives you today. It's in how it transforms you over time. It reshapes your identity. It teaches you that you can rely on yourself. And when you can rely on yourself, you stop needing permission from the world. You stop waiting for validation. You stop living for applause. You build, you create, you live, because you said you would. And that is the deepest power you can ever hold. not money, not fame, not approval, but the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know, I kept my word. I did not forget the life I promised myself. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. When Steve Jobs said those words, he wasn't speaking in theory. He was speaking from the trenches, from the nights where darkness wasn't just a concept, but a reality that wrapped itself around him. Fired from Apple, humiliated on the world stage, branded as difficult, arrogant, unfit to lead. Everything he had built was stripped away, and the same people who once celebrated him now stood against him. For most people, that kind of collapse is the end of the story. But for Jobs, it was only the beginning of something much greater. Darkness has a way of testing you in ways that comfort never will. When things are going well, when the applause is loud, when money is flowing, you don't really see what you're made of. But when the lights go out, when the crowd disappears, when failure eats away at everything you thought you had, that's when you discover the truth. That's when you find out whether the promise you made to yourself was real or just a convenient dream. Jobs understood something most people avoid. Darkness is not your enemy. Darkness is your forge. It is the pressure, the fire, the weight that strips away everything unnecessary until all that remains is the essence of who you are. Without darkness, there is no clarity. Without failure, there is no breakthrough. Without loss, there is no hunger. When Jobs left Apple, he could have chosen bitterness. He could have chosen to spend his years blaming others, hiding from the spotlight, living in quiet regret. Many people would have. But instead, he chose to embrace the darkness. He built NXT, a company that few understood at the time. He poured himself into Pixar, a studio that wasn't destined for success in the eyes of the world. And yet, both of these dark chapter ventures became essential pieces of the puzzle. NXT's software would later form the foundation for the revival of Apple. Pixar would change the history of animation forever. None of that would have existed if Jobs had rejected the darkness. You see, the thing about darkness is this: it gives you two choices. You can let it suffocate you, or you can let it fuel you. Jobs chose fuel. The critics who doubted him, they became fuel. The humiliation of being ousted, fool. The long nights where nothing seemed to work, fool. He wasn't crushed by those moments. He was sharpened by them. Think about your own life. Think about the moments where everything went wrong. The rejection letters, the failed attempts, the people who told you weren't enough. At the time, it felt like destruction. But what if it was actually construction? What if those moments weren't there to break you, but to build you into someone capable of keeping the life you promised yourself? Jobs believed that the hard moments weren't obstacles but opportunities in disguise. He said it himself, getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. It freed him. It forced him to enter the darkness and discover new parts of himself that comfort never would have revealed. Most people run from that kind of pain. They numb it, they hide from it, they distract themselves from it. But Jobs leaned into it. He let it become the fire that forged the next version of him. And here's the paradox. It is only when you walk through the darkest corridors that you begin to see the faint outlines of the light. Darkness clarifies. It strips away the illusions you once believed in. It forces you to ask, what am I really doing this for? What do I truly believe in? What matters enough to keep going when everything else is gone? For Jobs, the answer was always the same: the vision, the promise, the vow he made to himself. Darkness tested it. Darkness tried to break it, but each time the promise grew stronger. Each failure was not the end, but a rehearsal. Each loss was not a curse, but a sharpening stone. And this is why embracing darkness is so powerful. Because when you finally return to the light, you are not the same person who entered. You are stronger, sharper, more ruthless about what matters and what doesn't. The applause doesn't distract you anymore. The critics don't haunt you. The failures don't define you. You've already been through the fire, and the fire taught you that nothing is stronger than the vow you carry inside. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. Steve Jobs was obsessed with simplicity. Not the shallow kind of simplicity that people talk about on the surface, but the kind of simplicity that is born out of ruthlessness, precision, and the courage to cut away everything unnecessary. To him, simplicity wasn't just a design philosophy, it was a way of life. Think about the products he created: the iPod, the iPhone, the Mac. These devices didn't succeed because they had the longest list of features. In fact, they often succeeded because they had fewer features than their competitors. What set them apart was that every single detail had been stripped down, refined, and shaped until nothing remained except the essence of what mattered. Jobs believed that complexity is easy. Anyone can add more. Anyone can throw in extra features. Anyone can create noise. But simplicity requires discipline. Simplicity requires saying no more often than you say yes. Simplicity requires vision. But here's where most people miss the lesson. Jobs didn't just apply this philosophy to technology. He applied it to how he lived, how he thought, how he kept the life he promised himself. For him, simplicity was the key to protecting that promise. Because the truth is, distractions are everywhere. The world is filled with noise, demands from others, opinions, trends, temptations. If you try to chase all of it, you'll scatter yourself so thin that you forget the life you were supposed to be building. That's what happens to most people. They start with a vision, but they drown it in clutter. Jobs refused to drown. He cut away. He was ruthless. He said no to partnerships that didn't align with his vision. He said no to features that didn't serve the essence of the product. He said no to comfort, no to compromise, no to the countless distractions that could have pulled him away from what mattered most. This wasn't because he enjoyed being difficult. It was because he understood that protecting simplicity was protecting the promise. And protecting the promise was protecting his destiny. Now, think about your own life. How much complexity is weighing you down right now? How many promises have you broken to yourself because you got lost in distractions that never mattered? Every time you say yes to something that doesn't serve your vision, you dilute the power of your own promise. Every time you chase what looks good instead of what is essential, you bury the very life you said you wanted to live. Jobs believed that greatness doesn't come from addition, but subtraction. He once said that innovation is saying no to 1,000 things, and that same principle applies to you. Keeping the life you promised yourself isn't about adding more tasks to your to-do list. It isn't about chasing every opportunity that comes your way. It's about identifying what really matters, and then having the courage to cut away everything else. And make no mistake, this kind of simplicity requires courage. Because when you start saying no, you will disappoint people. You will be misunderstood. You will be called arrogant, stubborn, even reckless. People won't see the bigger picture you're protecting. They won't understand the promise you're guarding. And that's exactly why simplicity is ruthless. It demands that you choose the vision over approval. It demands that you honor the life you promised yourself, even when others think you're crazy. Look at the iPhone. Before it was released, phones were cluttered with buttons, endless menace, and complicated systems. Jobs asked a radical question: what if we removed it all? What if there was only one button? What if technology became invisible so that all that remained was the experience? That decision wasn't just design genius, it was ruthless simplicity in action. It was the willingness to cut away what was unnecessary to reveal the essence of what mattered. Now imagine applying that same mindset to your life. Imagine asking yourself, what if I cut away everything that distracts me from my vision? What if I said no to every demand, every noise, every temptation that doesn't serve the life I promised myself? What if I stopped chasing approval and started protecting simplicity with the same ferocity Jobs did? The truth is, simplicity is not gentle. It's not soft. It's ruthless. It requires you to strip away the illusions you've been hiding behind. It requires you to face the uncomfortable truth that most of what you do every day doesn't actually matter. It requires you to confront yourself and decide whether you're serious about the life you promised yourself, or whether you're just entertaining the idea of it. And that's why Jobs' obsession with simplicity was more than just a design principle. It was his way of ensuring he stayed true to himself. It was his armor against the chaos of the world. It was his filter against mediocrity. By cutting away everything else, he ensured that the only thing left was the essence of his vision. And that is why his work, his life, his legacy continues to endure. We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why even be here? Steve Jobs didn't care about comfort. He didn't care about living an easy life, about being universally liked, about settling for what was convenient. What drove him was legacy, the mark he would leave, the dent he would make, the promise he would keep not just to himself, but to the world that would come after him. Comfort and legacy are enemies. You cannot have both. Comfort whispers to you every day, slow down. Take it easy. Play it safe. Don't risk looking foolish. Don't push too far. Comfort wants you to stay where you are, because comfort feeds on fear. But legacy demands the opposite. Legacy demands you sacrifice the present for something bigger than yourself. Legacy asks you to endure criticism, rejection, even failure, in pursuit of something that may not reward you today, but will outlive you tomorrow. Jobs lived in that tension. He could have chosen the easy path after Apple forced him out. He could have cashed out, lived quietly, enjoyed his wealth, disappeared into the background. He didn't need to fight anymore. He didn't need to build anymore. He didn't need to risk being humiliated again. Comfort was right there waiting for him, but he turned his back on it. He chased the harder road, because deep down he knew, comfort dies with you, legacy doesn't. That's why his return to Apple wasn't just a business move. It wasn't about securing a bigger paycheck. It wasn't about revenge on the people who had doubted him. It was about legacy. It was about finishing the story the way he had promised himself it would be finished. Every product that followed, the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, was a statement of legacy over comfort. They were reminders that greatness doesn't come from doing what's easy. Greatness comes from pursuing what will endure. And this is where so many people fail. They chase comfort, thinking it will make them happy. They avoid risk, thinking it will make them safe. They cling to approval, thinking it will make them loved. And maybe for a while, it works. Maybe for a while, they feel secure. But over time, comfort turns into regret. Because the life they promised themselves slowly slips away, replaced by convenience and compromise. And when they look back, they realize they never created something that would outlast them. Jobs never wanted that kind of life. He didn't want to simply exist. He wanted to build something that would echo long after he was gone. That's why he was relentless, why he demanded so much from himself and everyone around him. To outsiders, it looked harsh. To insiders, it felt impossible. But to him, it was necessary, because comfort wasn't the goal. Legacy was. And if you look closely, you'll see the pattern. Every breakthrough, every invention, every revolution in history has come from people who chose legacy over comfort. People who refused to settle. People who endured the pain of doubt and criticism and rejection because they were chasing something bigger than their own lives. Jobs was simply one of those people. A man who lived with the constant awareness that his time was limited and that wasting it on comfort was the ultimate betrayal. He once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." That's not a statement of despair. That's a statement of freedom. Because when you realize death is inevitable, you stop clinging to comfort. You stop living for safety. You stop wasting time trying to avoid risk. Instead, you start asking, what will remain when I'm gone? What will I leave behind? What will my work say about me when I'm no longer here to defend it? That is the essence of legacy. It's not about statues or awards or headlines. It's about creating something that continues to matter, even when you are no longer present. It's about building in such a way that your fingerprints remain on the world. It's about living the life you promised yourself so fiercely that it outlives your own heartbeat. Jobs did not choose comfort. He chose legacy. And that's why today, more than a decade after his death, his influence is still alive. every device that carries his philosophy, every design that follows his principles, every company that tries to imitate his obsession with simplicity and vision. They are all testaments to a man who refused to take the easy road. I won't forget the life I promised myself. That is the thread running through every part of Steve Jobs' journey. The power of keeping promises to yourself, the courage to turn darkness into fuel, the discipline to embrace ruthless simplicity, and the choice to chase legacy over comfort. Most people live their lives reacting to noise, to fear, to doubt, to circumstance. Jobs lived his life creating, not because it was easy, not because it was comfortable, but because he refused to betray the vow he made to himself. And now, the question is not about him, it's about you. What is the promise you've made to yourself? When the lights go out, when the critics laugh, when failure surrounds you, will you still keep it? Will you strip away the noise, embrace the darkness, and cut down to the essence of what matters? Will you trade comfort for legacy? Because in the end, that is all that remains. Not the excuses, not the fears, not the applause. Only the life you built, the impact you left, the promise you kept. Jobs didn't forget his, and neither should you.